Let's start the Board of Commissioners meeting of August 29th. I'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Agenda review.
Mr. Chair, there are no changes to the agenda this morning.
Okay.
Move the agenda.
Been moved. Second. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Administrative Services. We've got, or excuse me, the Commissioners' reports. Let's start with Vance because he's going to be brief. No.
I am going to be very brief. We had on the Wednesday the 16th, the day after our board meeting, I had a strategic planning session for the Historical Society. On the 17th, Kip and I met with City of Mankato for the intergovernmental meeting and spoke on the intersection of Hafner and County Road 17. I then had a TDS board meeting, and I went pitching with the commissioner in the afternoon with Drew, the Commissioner of Health, and that was fun. What a nice guy.
Yeah.
The guy is just a super nice guy.
Who won?
I got beat. Did you win?
No.
Oh yeah.
I think my wife did better than I did.
He's good. He's got a horseshoe thing set in his backyard.
Well,
Does he really?
that's why you picked that as the sport, the one to do.
Yeah. So he's not bad. He says he's not great, and I've seen great, and he's probably right, but he's a lot better than I am. You know, for somebody that hasn't done it for 10 years, I guess.
Same here.
On Monday the 21st, I did the legislative or the breakfast with Congressman Waltz at the Verizon Center.
Yeah.
On the 22nd, I had my airport commission, and besides going to the state fair yesterday and seeing as many projects that our Blue Earth County kids have done, that's about as much as I did the last 2 weeks.
Okay. Thank you,
Nice
Vance.
and short, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was good.
There you go.
Let's go to the same on the same side. Let's go to Kip.
All right, after our last meeting, as Vance already mentioned, we had a good discussion about the Hafner Drive intersection at the intergov meeting.
Was it good?
Yes, it was.
It was
I mean,
good.
it was just I think the article in the paper summed it up pretty well what the discussion was, but we got more to talk about. Then I was out to the Duck Lake Association, had their annual picnic on Friday night, so I stopped out there and said hi to the folks. They had about 100 people there. They do a great job out there. I just have to say they have a good picnic. People show up, people participate, and they're appreciative of me stopping and visiting with them for a few minutes. Then we had our executive meeting for MVAC. Just had a couple routine things to get done. I took over as president last month, so I will be the president coming up for the next year, 2 years at MVAC.
Oh, congratulations.
Yep. And Mark and I were at the RCEF meeting for lunch. Got to hear from all of the people that kind of deal with entrepreneurship and small business in the Blue Earth County area with the SBDC, the Indeed was there, and SCORE was there, and we just had probably had about 16 or 18 people there, and a couple other commissioners from a couple other counties. Whatwan County were there, and just got to kind of see how everything intertwines with RCEF. And the meeting went really well. It was about an hour and a half long, but gained some information as far as what these other organizations doing and trying to understand that we don't have a whole lot of overlap. We don't want to be funding something, it being RCEF, that's our interest in this, funding RCEF and have someone else out there doing the same exact thing. And after that meeting, I was pretty confident that we're not really overlapping anything. There is a little overlap, but not a lot. They all work together pretty well, and they do only count the numbers once. So if RCEF works with somebody and gets a job, but they work with the SBCD and they get a job, it's not counted twice. And that was one of my biggest concerns. You know, we all counting things twice, so everybody's getting more. And to me, it sounds like it's all done on one system, and it was good to hear that, because sometimes you get a little nervous about duplicating programs and funding them, and that just doesn't make sense. So, and then we had a joint ditch meeting with LeSueur County, Judicial Ditch 15, had some good discussion on that, had to order some repairs and redetermination of benefits. And then on Friday, as the new president of MVAC, they had a training, and all the employees were down at the Cato Ballroom for a training, all-day training. 200 employees, they came from all of the offices, and so I went down there during lunch and just kind of gave them a, welcome to Blue Earth County, and kind of gave them a little talk about who I was and that I took over as president, and thanked them for all their hard work. And then yesterday, another joint meeting with Waseca County, and Will and I were over there and allowed them to put a fish trap fish barrier in on one of our county ditches. So it's an electrical fish barrier. Very interesting, but sounds like they work really well, and we approved that yesterday. And that brings me to today, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Kip.
Was
Drew?
that an invasive, sure?
Yeah, for the carp, yeah. Well, it's all fish, but that's what they're trying to keep out of the carp.
Yeah, invasive.
Sounds like they're making their way through some of the waters already. You know, But, so we had our last meeting August 15th. And on that same day, NACO had an online seminar for healthcare and why it matters for counties. We've heard a lot about that before. The amount approximately that counties invest annually is $80 billion across the country. So the question is, how much more should counties invest, in healthcare issues, healthcare related issues? That same day, we had that, I'd mentioned it at our last board meeting, we had that On the Move event with the Optimists also. It was up at the WOW Zone, and it was very well attended. I want to thank Eric and Ryan up at Public Works. Eric, what's his last name? Do you remember? Works for Public Works up there. Drives a truck and things.
Van de Heisen.
Yeah, Van Heesen or something. He came on his own time, used the county, big old beautiful truck, not old, fairly new, and kids really loved it. There was about 150 people that showed up.
That was, I forgot to mention that I was there, but that was a great turnout you had up there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. It was kind of fun. It's our first one, something like that.
So you're optimistic about it?
Yes.
Yeah. It was a good turnout.
Yeah. A lot of young families is really what it was. Just a lot of young families. Seeing the fire engine, EMS ambulance, and talking to people. It was nice for them to be able to do that. Even in a couple of classic cars and things like that. Then on Wednesday, the 16th, normally there would be a RAC call-in, but they had a survey process in place instead, trying to figure out when we're going to be having our call-ins, I guess, over the next year. Thursday, pitching with the health commissioner, and he always would say then, pitch me your ideas, kind of too, so that was part of it. You could play with them and pitch an idea. Mostly I affirmed, some of the things that have been talked about already, and I really think we are going to head towards some sort of health care for all, Minnesota health care for all. I'm not sure if it'll be federal, but I think Minnesota's going to be looking at that. I know the governor's been looking at it. Mr. Ellinger, or Dr. Ellinger, believes that we really need it. So, and then also to retool or reformulate how we look at what is public health. People, when they hear that word, they just kind of glass over, but public health is really everything. It's everything we do. All the decisions we make here as a board and administrator really affect our community and the community's health. On Monday, the 21st, there was a DWI WAVE media event. So there's I think it's about 12 or 14 days where there's increased enforcement. Vance and Will are fully aware of these kind of things that happen, where they bring in people from around the area and have a little bit higher concentration. Overtime dollars are provided, and it's in preparation, for the big holiday, the Labor Day holiday, and so that's going on right now still. And then, it was a media event in St. Peter. It went very well. We had a lot of good turnout. A lot of people from Nicollet County, LeSueur County, and Blue Earth County. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming to that, and for Annette Larson with MnDOT that helps organize these things in our region. And then the Vine board meeting on Wednesday morning, and then the Saturday, Sunday, just a quick personal note. My 5th grandchild, Emilia Jeanette Campbell, she had her first birthday. So,
Oh, wow.
so there was a lot of people convened up, my son Nick and his wife Abby up in Minneapolis. And then on Sunday was the sort of a church dedication, sort of similar to a baptism. And it's in North Minneapolis. And it's a wonderful, smaller church. I'd say it's very mixed there on the north side. And that's one reason why they decided to move there, because they love that church. And that's about it then for my,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Drew.
Yeah.
Will?
Okay. On the 23rd, I had a phone conference call with Tony Carter from Ramsey County. She represented AMC on the governor's committee on community law enforcement relations, and she gave me a briefing as to the work that they had done. They had a lot of input, mostly around training for law enforcement and that type of thing. So she will be presenting further at our policy committee meetings here in the middle of September. And then Kip mentioned the LeSueur County joint meeting on the 24th and the joint meeting with Waseca on yesterday. So that's my report.
Oh, thank you,
I had
Will.
to rest up from catching all those big fish.
Reason to rest.
Took her a little easy the last week or
Need to
two.
rest. Yep. Well, and I guess, gee, I'll get mine in here too. Yep, with Kip, with the RCEF, we had that, and that was a good meeting. And then we had, the LeSueur County Joint Ditch meeting. Then I had my Partners for Affordable Housing meeting on the 24th. And of course, then I was there too before that with the pitch with the commissioner. I wasn't there the whole time, but I caught a little bit of that. And then Friday, the 25th of August, I did go to the Blue Earth County Historical Society's their volunteer appreciation night. That's always good. And yeah, that concludes my report. No state fair yet or anything, so.
There you go.
Record.
That's almost a record.
I think that is a
Yeah,
record.
it is a record. All right.
I think it is.
Well, we'll be ahead here. Come on up, Michael, and give us your,
We'll get you down there
grant.
with Michael.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning,
Good
Michael.
morning, Mike.
So it's about that time of year again too. We have the State Department of Veteran Affairs operational enhancement grant again this year. We utilized it last year too, as well as before the board, just to kind of touch on that. Same procedure essentially as last year. There's a grant agreement and a resolution that's in the board packet there that we need to get approved to enter into this grant again. Some of the highlights we used it for last year were for technology improvements. We got laptops for myself and for my assistant service officer, Pat, and then we got mobile printers too, so we can actually print the forms out and do signatures on site. Also, we're allowed to use it for training and education, so there's a lot of training and education out there that many offices within the district and the state have been utilizing for years that we're kind of jumping on board. It just kind of keeps us up to snuff and better prepared to deal with changes as things come down on the federal and state level. As you're all aware, that stuff tends to go like the wind sometimes.
Especially nowadays,
Yeah.
with your, especially the federal, yeah.
Yep. So and that's kind of what we plan on using it for again this year too, is for some technology improvements in the office. We're going to a digital file format too from a lot of our hard files too, to hopefully save some room and free up some space, and then allow us to access information easier. So with that, we're kind of eyeballing a newer copying station and scanning station too, not just for the scanning project, but the amount of applications that's being increased now and the amount of new forms we have coming in. We kind of see that need for the office. Then likewise too, we're looking at continuing education and the training and accreditation for myself and Pat. We're currently at about 6 different accreditations apiece that allows us to access information in the federal system, in real time as opposed to waiting for phone calls from the Whipple building up in St. Paul. And previously, I think we'd been at about 2 accreditations for the office. So it's really increased our scope of information we can access, and so when we have constituents that come in, we can better counsel and guide them on information the VA has that used to have to wait for a fax or a phone call. So, and then other than that, we can also use it and plan to use it again this year for assisting veterans attain services. The state is gracious enough to allow offices to use it for second opinions. So when you're coming to like a medical claim for constituents, if the VA doesn't give a favorable opinion or their doc disagrees with whatever evidence is out there too, if the ability to attain a second opinion is hindered by their inability to afford it, we have some discretion under this grant to help assist them find those services too. So it's overall pretty much what it says it is. Operational enhancement allows us to improve our operations and to better serve our constituents too. So
Move to approve.
That's exciting.
So moved?
Second.
Is there a second? Yep, second. Any
I really appreciate you going through the, getting this done. I know for a few years we didn't do this in the past, and everything we can do to help our veterans across the county and is just huge. Now you can actually put up billboards with this. I haven't seen the Mike McLaughlin billboard yet. I've seen them. I go to other counties and I see names, and
Yep.
now have we decided to put one of those up? But yeah, Mike.
So there is a marketing contingent with the grant, and I think we have it at a pretty conservative estimate, about $1,800 is what we have it budgeted for in this upcoming year. One nice part about that too is they let us flex funds throughout the year. It's essentially once the resolution agreement started, there's an open dialogue between our office and the state. So if we're essentially bringing a designated hitter and see a need or see a reason to fund something else, we can, as long as we engage the state. But on the marketing and the billboard, I think those go for about the tune of $8,000 is what they go
There's
for.
better ways to spend your money. than to try to-
$12,500 is what the
Yeah.
grant is right now. It's based on veteran population. And so kind of my vision for the office was to target education and opportunities to get out and be with our constituency in the nursing homes.
I appreciate that's on the low end of your scale of what you need, but
It's-
it also what it does is it allows people when they're driving down their own saying, oh yeah,
Yep.
that is one thing. And now we do have good operations. You're running a good ship over there, so we appreciate what you're doing.
And we are looking for other passive, non-monetary ways to do marketing and outreach for the department and the services, i.e. we have partnered with Vine in the past too, and we are in the fall here for doing educational roundtables, and they've been gracious enough to put that out in their media, which touches a big portion of the veteran population in the county too as well. But that's kind of the focus has still been on education and outreach. I was told long ago that good shepherds have to smell like sheep, so I try to get out towards the sheep.
You bet.
Okay.
Good for you.
Awesome.
Good,
job.
you're on the right track. So all
other
those,
questions?
we have the motion in front of us. Any further discussion, questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thank you,
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Okay. Do we want to go back?
Oh, I think it's probably time for Mike, isn't it? Yeah, it's 9:20.
Mike Mower.
Mike Mauer. Michael. Another.
Morning, Mike.
Morning, Mike.
Morning.
Morning, Michael.
Good.
Just have a couple things quick on the docket. These should be pretty fast. First one I have is the hazardous mitigation planning grant. Our hazardous mitigation plan expires September of 2018. We apply for a grant every year. It becomes available. Now, I hope Hurricane Harvey doesn't put that in jeopardy because there's a lot of things that are going to be changing in FEMA real fast here because of the amounts. So what that hazardous mitigation plan does is is a guideline by the federal government to have it in place, and that's how we receive our mitigation grant funding. So what we've done for the Munsons and the Neelys, and now we're attempting to do for Johnson and out there, if we don't have a hazardous mitigation plan in place, we can't apply for those funds. They're not accessible. Now, this time around, the state has a contract with the UMD to aid in the assistance of the hazardous mitigation plans. It's much less expensive than the former ones that we had done. So we're going to move forward with UMD, or we're looking at that. This is just the initial phase so that we can apply to get the grant funds to do it. It's FEMA's regulation, so if I ask that we can move forward. I've been in contact with Jen Nelson up in mitigation. I'm a little worried. Some of these plans, it's taken 18 months to get done, and that would put ours expired. And if ours is expired, at that point, then we'd lose the opportunity to apply for these funds. However, she said that if I have it in writing from her, that if we get a disaster during the expiration, that they'll move us ahead of the game because there's 12 months to apply for those funds, and we'll get it done. So I wanted to make sure I got it in writing from the state that if we do fall into the expired status, what are we going to do? How would we be available for getting mitigation grants? Because we use them. So she assured me though it would add maybe delay it, we would still be available to apply for it.
That's good.
In writing.
Move to approve. Second.
Been moved and second. Any discussion, questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carries.
Second is the TZD grant. The TZD grant is the Towards Zero Death grant. It's what we use as the old Safe and Sober. It's a multi-jurisdictional grant. We share it with other small cities in the city of Mankato. It's extensive, and it's been working, and I ask that you move to approve that grant.
I'll make a motion to move. Oh, go ahead.
It's been
Go ahead,
moved.
second.
Okay. It's been moved by
Sorry, I
Vance.
jumped there.
No.
Okay, it's been moved and second. Any questions, discussion? All those in favor of that grant, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carries.
Thank you.
Well, that was real
Thanks
quick.
a lot.
Thank you, Mike.
Michael.
All right.
Moving right along here.
Moving right along. Do we want to try to get something in quick before
Sure, we can do a couple
9:25?
of administrative items. The first item, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, is the county board minutes for August 15th.
Move to approve.
Been moved. Or second?
Second.
Second. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right.
Next
You
up
got 2
would be the
minutes,
bills.
yes. Bills.
Move bills.
Second.
Okay, been moved in second. Any questions for Bob?
We had a
on any
couple.
bills? Go ahead, Drew.
Oh, that first week, the Seven Systems LLC waiver, 23,760. I'm just not familiar with that. The number 7, so it's like right at the top almost. It's fourth one down.
Sure. That would be payment by Human Services for a person covered under the waiver. So I assume it's it's a bathroom remodel, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So making it accessible for a person with
Yeah, I've seen those before on there. So,
Yep.
so this company came in and did it for them.
Right. They're
Okay.
the contractor that remodeled the bathroom.
Oh, okay. I hadn't seen it. Seven Systems. And then the Geislinger and Sons contracted services,
That's County Ditch 28.
is it?
It is, yes.
County Ditch 28.
How's that coming along?
It's done.
Is it
Yeah,
done?
It's been done, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you. Dennis.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I don't know.
All right, that it?
Anybody else?
Anybody else? All right, all those in, we have a motion in front of us to pay the bills. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carries. All right, I think it's time. Mr. Craig.
Morning, Craig.
Good morning.
Morning, Craig.
Got a couple
Morning.
items.
Couple items. First of all, we have redeterminations of benefits. We've already ordered as a joint board the redetermination of benefits for County Ditch 83. There are actually 3 other ditches that are actually adjacent to 83 that probably also need to be redetermined. County Ditch 26 is probably one of the worst determinations of benefits in the entire county. Really needs to have a redetermination of benefits. There's only something like just a few 660 acres, even though there's about 2,000 acres that are in the system.
That's incredible.
And that does not include the fact that JD 22 and 86 dump into it, and they're not paying any outlet fees or anything like that into 26. So the 26 people, landowners, are really getting soaked.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And the other 76 is just a good opportunity. They're talking about potentially doing a redetermination or actually an improvement, and it's right there, so it'll be cheaper to do it all at once and bring everything up to benefits. Let's see, the JD 22, that's kind of a mess too. They did it in 77, but the benefits have a huge discrepancy with hundreds of, about 30 times the rate for people in the upland as versus some of the lowland. So it just doesn't even make sense. So I am requesting the Blue Earth County Drainage Authority order a redetermination of benefits and appoint viewers for Blue Earth County Ditch 26, Blue Earth County Ditch 76, and Judicial Ditch 22. The proposed findings and order were attached as part of the order.
I'll move approval.
It's been moved. A second. Any further discussion, questions? All those in favor of the...
I have a question.
Oh, you got one, Drew?
Yeah, so just looking at this, I was thinking, because you got the redetermination is ordered for 26, 76, and then the judicial ditch, which is shared. But then down here, the background, it goes into the county 83 landowners requested redetermination of benefits. So can that trigger all those other ones? I mean, do people from those other ditches have to be a part of the petition?
No, they do not have to. The board can order redeterminations. In fact, the way the law is, the landowners can request a redetermination, but they cannot really petition for, force a redetermination. That's all up to the board whether a redetermination gets completed. So.
But they still petition the county to ask us if we could.
They can petition. They can say a petition and say we want a redetermination, but the way the law is written, the board has no obligation to automatically do a redetermination on no matter what kind of petition they have. The only case that it's required if it's a correction of an error and more than 51% of the landowners are on the petition. But that has to point out an error and saying that we need to correct this specific error.
So under the authority then of this request from the county ditch 83 landowners.
And it just makes.
I'm just asking about that because I'm just wondering how that ties in then specifically with these other 3 ditch systems.
Well, a lot of them are the same landowners, and really, there's a lot of ditch systems that we need to be redetermined in the county, just because.
For fairness.
For fairness, it is totally unfair the way the 26 benefits are currently set up. It's not fair to the landowners with the 660 acres who are paying the bill basically for another 3,000-4,000 acres.
Yeah.
That people are getting by with basically either dumping their water directly or indirectly into 26 and not paying a dime for repairs.
So these ditch systems are aware of it then?
Oh, yeah.
The other landowners that are all on those 3 lists?
Well, we had a meeting with Waseca County yesterday and approved the one as a joint board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that this is certainly not something that they wouldn't welcome. The landowner, I think.
On 26, definitely.
Yeah, the landowners would definitely benefit
Yeah.
from a redetermination.
And there's also the issue of the grass buffer strip, reimbursing people. That's going to be some issues on this particular ditch system too. Both, at least 2 of the systems. 76 is an all tile system, but the other ones do have open ditch. So.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Okay, we've got the motion in front of us on the redetermination of benefits for those 3 ditches. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carries. Okay, then your next.
And now, next thing we have is County Ditch 12. We had a call from a landowner, and well, we did actually did a redetermination of benefits on this, and this was actually approved by the board on December 13th of 2016. This landowner apparently was combination, he was out of state and he was in the hospital, so he did not contact us until several months after the December hearing, and kind of called and says, you know, there's a court order saying that I'm part of County Ditch 43. And took the time, did some research, and sure enough, we did find the district, the court order saying that, yeah, he was entirely within County Ditch 43. Now that's, unfortunately, there was no records in County Ditch 12 about that, any indication that had happened. It was all the records were part of the County Ditch 43 file, so that's why that was missed. So this is basically a correction of what the viewers call an obvious error. Once they saw the facts, it was obvious, yes, this should never have been part of this particular system. And so what I'm asking here is today's meeting, the Blue Earth County Drainage Authority, I'm requesting a motion acknowledging the error and approve the corrected county ditch benefits listed as recommended by viewer Ron Winquist.
I'll move approval.
Been moved. Second. Any discussion, questions?
This is the one I actually brought up at that hearing, because Mr. Hopkins contacted me, and he was ill, and it was coming to the 11th hour, and that's why I brought it up at the public hearing.
Yeah.
Not so much on his behalf, but to figure out the process, and so I'm glad we were able to take care of it.
Well, it was kind of a little bit involved because since he didn't come forward the way.
Right.
If he would have came forward right away, this would have been very easy.
Yeah, and he did call me, and he had some medical issues, and so he couldn't make the meeting. And I don't even know if he had the documents at that point. But
no, he did not.
This is good that it got taken care of. I appreciate that. Yep. Thank you.
Good. Yep. Any further? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Craig.
That's short and sweet today. All right. Well,
More administrative we can do?
we could do something quick there.
Mr.
give an
Chair,
update?
Commissioners, item number 3 in your packet is the Human Resources agenda. Just informational items today. We filled 3 positions, a maintenance engineer in the physical plant area, a custody actually 2 custody officers in the sheriff's department then. We also did, though, have a couple of resignations and completion of employment of 3 custody officers, so we're continuing to have turnover in that area, and so we have initiated recruitment to refill those custody officer positions. Then we have a promotion of an assistant county attorney at the recommendation of the county attorney from an ACA 1 to an ACA 2. And then lastly, we've begun recruitment for a public information officer. Be happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
So it appears that we still have a lot of resignation going on with our custody officers. Is it some of the main reason is that that's kind of a training thing for law enforcement and they're getting police jobs somewhere?
One of these is related to someone that was pursuing a law enforcement career, and so they did receive an offer from another county to be a deputy sheriff, I believe. So yeah, that is part of our turnover issue.
Okay.
Just have
Drew?
one question too. So we're recruiting for a public information officer, and we've waited, quite a while since we've had ours officially, here. Wondering, has there been any changes or anything? I mean, we were examining, or that's what I was under the impression we were looking at something there different, and I didn't know what.
Right. We have modified the job description some, incorporated a few more administrative tasks, kind of doing some reorganization within our administrative staffing team, trying to free up actually Jesse Anderson's time a little bit to do more of our process improvement. So be a combination of public information and administrative support tasks in this job description.
Okay.
All right.
And what's
All right.
what's the starting wage for that? Or
I don't
Or
have that information.
B32.
It's a B3 tube. I don't have the exact dollar amount with
You
the
can get it
beam,
to me
sorry.
later.
I can get it to you.
All right, thank you, Bob. Well, I think at this time, we're bringing just only the Phil show.
Morning, Phil.
Morning, Phil.
morning,
Morning, Phil.
Good to see you all. Once in a blue moon, I have a more brief report, and this is one of those days. I have a couple of informational items and no action items, so that's new.
Wow.
We have tried to go to a 2-year cycle for a lot of our contracts, so I think that's starting to show up a little bit and helping manage the volume a little bit too. So, just 2 areas that I think are pretty straightforward and fairly stable for us in human services. The first of those being adult foster care, and you'll see the statistics. There's 2 ways that foster care is provided through individuals that are in this business, so to speak. One is family foster care, so that really is mom and pop option, that if a given home decides they want to take in folks and have that be part of their mission, that's this first category, and you'll see it's relatively small. There's 11 family adult foster care homes in our county. You'll see the occupancy rate too is significantly different in that there's 19 occupied beds and 17 open beds. There still is a split out of how they're used per county, Blue Earth County obviously being the largest of the counties that use those resources. But there is more ability for those families to match who they want, to be part of their family, because it is a smaller and non-corporate kind of environment. So I think that's why you see some more on a percentage basis open beds. And you'll see the second category profile look quite different. It's a lot larger, where there's 364 occupied beds in corporate foster care. So this is the Lutheran Social Services, RAM, those types of providers. Those contracts do come before you, and they have facilities that they can actually develop based on need, and they get really good at doing that on a different kind of scale. And you'll see again the split outs, where Blue Earth County is obviously the majority of the utilization, but you'll also see a occupancy rate where almost all the beds are full almost all the time. And so it's hard when an individual needs to move, or if there's new people that come into the system. It does take a while to develop these beds. And the state has put a moratorium on expansion. You can get exceptions to that, but they do control how that expansion goes. This is a driver for us, as we've talked about the min choices issue, that we do have a lot of people in this business in our county, and so what we refer to as import a lot of people from other counties into our county. And that's true for us and probably maybe 10 of the counties throughout Minnesota that have that kind of demographic, St. Louis being one of the really big ones that has a lot of presence in this as well. But from a percentage basis, what we're looking at is increases in caseloads is as big as anyone on a percentage basis. I'm just shifting to a somewhat related area, just that it serves adults as well as adult protection. So we spend a lot of time on child protection. There's a lot of volume in child protection, but as I think you're all aware, adult protection is a growing concern for us. Our communities are changing and people are living longer, and so there's vulnerability that comes in as we age into our life experience. And from that primarily, and certainly through Pat's office, he sees this as well, but the financial issues, people abusing those relationships, sometimes family members or caregivers being in a situation where there's a fiduciary concern. We would look at that, as well as any neglect and direct care issues that are being provided to folks that are considered vulnerable. You'll see a marked change here in the raw data on the first slide, that we were in the 400s as far as volume, and then there was a dramatic decrease, and that's because the state now operates this Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center, and we refer to that as MARC. So if you hear that, that's the acronym. And so there's some triage that happens at the state level. If people call in and they say, well, that's not really an adult protection report, they can sort a lot of that volume out at the center. And so there's kind of this triaged reporting that we get now. So you see a dip in the overall numbers that come to us as a county. Just the breakout in the paragraph, 98 reports were screened in. Of those 98, 10 were substantiated, 42 were determined inconclusive, 27 were false, 7 did not meet the criteria for vulnerable adult, and 10 of the cases it was not possible to investigate because the information wasn't sufficient to pursue that. And then there's some duplication in that for two reasons. One is that you could fit into more than one of those categories, but also that there's sometimes there's more than one report per case. So the numbers do get skewed if you try to add them all up. And then there's a bar graph. I do need to point out to the board that the first bar in the bar graph, the 318, is not accurate. If you look at the raw data, that number was 416, so that was a wrong year that got pushed into this graph. But other than that, just the pictorial picture of those the raw data and the breakouts are provided to you.
Quick question.
Yeah.
It's okay. So just out of curiosity then, so like a lot of these foster cases or of abuse that come forward is people who have been diagnosed with something, or they're under some rule because they need help, and so they're in a family, or they have a bedroom within a family's house or something, and so then I was just curious, so are a lot of the cases where there's like blurred financial boundaries, mostly like taking some people out for dinner and putting it on their tab or something, or that kind of stuff? I mean, is it? I'm just curious what some of the reports
I think
are.
Pat could comment on this too. I do have to report that some of those situations, I think those are gray areas that we're usually able to work with people and come alongside of them.
Yeah.
We're not looking for trouble. Most of the cases I hate to report are pretty egregious. It's emptying out of bank accounts. I mean, it's pretty dramatic, and that's when we
the
get
substantiated ones.
Yes, the substantiated ones.
I agree 100% with what Bill's saying.
Oh, so people just take advantage of the fact they've got dollars coming in, they just use them.
Exactly.
Because they don't think they need them.
And they think that they're theirs, or that because I've taken care of mom or dad for so long, now their money is my money, and that isn't the way the law reads, or what Pat's trying to protect for those vulnerable people, because they still have life left to lead. And yes, you're right about the first part of your question, is that they also have to be, meet the criteria to be vulnerable. And so that might be because of a diagnosis of dementia, often something like that, or a medical need that they're not mobile, and because of that they're vulnerable and they need daily cares. And if they need daily cares, then that puts them in a vulnerable spot where somebody could take advantage of that. Or medications.
Doesn't mean they're incompetent though, right?
Not at all. And that's really what we're trying to protect in our combined mission, is to say, this person still has rights, they still have opinions of their own that we want to try to honor. And sometimes the family isn't taking good care of that. Is what we would look at. So it's a really hard. I mean, child abuse, obviously in every form, neglect and abuse, all of that. But when you get into this elderly population, that physical piece is really kind of an ugly reality that we have to look at. So
that's probably the most common form.
I think so, and growing, when you say, Pat, too, that because of the demographics and because, some of those diagnoses of Alzheimer's and dementia have grown along with the population trending upward, that it's becoming more common just on a percentage basis. I'll just highlight this last graph, just the pie chart, and you'll see the different areas. The neglect obviously is always the biggest one. You'll see financial exploitation here too, kind of to your question, Commissioner. And then depending on how that breaks out, is it exploitation of fiduciary relationship or financial exploitation, and there is no fiduciary relationship. Those two combined is a big chunk of the pie, and the physical abuse is a much smaller area of concern on a percentage basis. So those are our two areas of practice. I just want to make sure I'm kind of bringing those before you so you see a picture of what staff are up to, and part of our mission, very important part of our mission.
All right. Appreciate that, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. I guess we just have a couple of items with administrative services.
Sure, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, item number 4 in your packet is a memo regarding a professional service contract with ISG. You'll recall that the board approved the budget for our building project at the government center a few weeks ago, and ISG has recommended that we have kind of a project-specific contract. We've been working with ISG up to this point under their retainer contract that we've had in place for many years. And so we're recommending that we enter into a professional service contract with ISG to finish out the government center project.
All right,
I'll move approval.
been moved.
Second.
Second. Any questions, discussion?
I've got some
Drew?
questions. So I just wrote Bob, and he helped me clear up some of it, about some of the questions I had. We had a discussion too on the phone yesterday late afternoon, and I didn't get a chance to really kind of sink my teeth into what this is, the contract. And but there are some issues and concerns that I have, and because of the size of the project, and I have to admit, I'm obviously, and probably all of us are unfamiliar with some of these things. But there's things that I noticed I asked Bob to send me the 25-page contract, and it is a sort of what Bob would call a boilerplate, architectural agreement. But I'm just curious, I got some concerns. One of them is that it says that it's important for, and it's too bad Pat had to step out, but that it should, for legal, this document has important legal consequences. Consultation with an attorney is encouraged, it says right in there, with respect to its completion and or modification. And so I know that an attorney has not looked at this. Nobody's reviewed it or looked at it at all. And I'm just concerned that at least it could have had some eyeballs just looking at it to clean it up a little bit, make sure that we're protected. And then the construction manager portion in the contract, it just says stately to be determined. And I was just curious about that because I know that 4 weeks ago at the August 1st meeting, we approved we went through a bidding process and had the Kraus Anderson approved to be our construction management people. And they're not named in this contract at all. And I just think that it's important that they're in there, going forward, that we are going to accept them. It's been 4 weeks. I just wonder why they're not on board. The board voted on it and passed it, and I'd like to have some answers to that, I guess, as to why. And then the total budget, Bob helped me with a few of those things. It's almost $24 million. I wasn't sure everything that was included or excluded. Looking at, like, when they bid on things, they've listed quite a few vendors that ISG wants to use, mostly themselves. It also included the furnishings, I remember, from inside the building, things like that, in the dollar amount estimates that we have.
Yes.
Do we have then, Bob, the authority at that time to look at who we're going to use as vendors, or do they just take it and do it? Or does ISG just take it?
We will have the authority to work with a vendor of our choice for the furniture, fixtures, and equipment.
Okay, so at that time, we'll still be able to separately look at bidding process or something.
Either a bidding or, depending on the cost, whether we do a direct purchase.
Okay. And then let me just a couple more things. The schematic design drawings that were completed at April 28th, 2017. Now, I'm just operating under assumptions here. Is that the one that we finally approved at our work session, or which one? I'm just trying to figure it out, which one they're going by.
It would be the one that was presented in the work session.
The final one that we approved.
Right, with those adjustments.
We had consensus on or something.
Right, the ones with the cost reductions that the board requested.
Okay. And then, so the format kind of asks for sort of an itemized list estimate for the costs. And I know that's not in there. Is that in some other format that we have that's attached to this contract, Bob, do you know, or?
Can you ask your question again? I'm not sure I followed.
Well, somewhere in this 25-page document at like it's called 1.1.3, total cost itemized list. It doesn't list anything. So I was just wondering, you know, it just seems like the document's missing a lot of things with, you know, that normally would be in it. And I'm just concerned, and I think the board should be concerned about this too. I'm just, you know, it's not like we're looking for problems, but I think in order to protect ourselves a little bit, some of these things maybe should be in there. That's all.
The $23.9 million was what the board approved 4 weeks ago. There is detailed documents that support that number.
Okay.
The fact that we have contracted with Kraus Anderson, they are working up their estimate so they're kind of working against that number, and they're doing another round of kind of detailed accounting of what this building project would cost. And so those numbers will be compared probably next week. They're, I think, going to bring in their original cost estimate.
Oh, it would be. Okay. Well, then that leads into the final concern that I had, other than the other ones. When Pat, you had to step out, I raised the concern that no attorney had looked at this contract that we're entering in. Okay. And I thought it'd be nice to have somebody at least look at it to see what omissions might be present, or anything of concern that's been changed within the contract, you know. But it was the construction manager shall be retained no later than August 1st. And so that can't happen if we haven't done so. And it's already almost September 1st. And so I'm just wondering if that date is incorrect. I would think, you know, if this contract is to be accurate, I'm just concerned that it feels to me like a kind of a rush job to get it here today on our docket. And that I just personally think, unless there's some real deep strategic reason why it has to be approved today, that we couldn't push it forward for approval at the next board meeting where we'd have more information, the county attorney or somebody with some eyeballs for contracts would be able to at least just read through it and make sure that it has what we really want in it. And that's, you know, that's what I'm just asking for, and I think it might be wise to do so.
Just to address the August 1st date, the board did approve an agreement with the construction manager for August 1st, so okay. That has been completed.
You mean we approved?
You approved Kraus Anderson
right.
to be the construction.
And for some reason they're not listed in this contract at all. So
yeah, I think we can correct that first page where we could add their name. That would be.
Would that be?
That would make sense.
That would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the language in the contract that says that we should have an attorney review things. I just think that since nobody's been asked to look at it, I'm just concerned that it should at least be looked at. You know, everything else that you helped me answer was appropriate. You know, I mean, you helped me answer some questions. So it's not that I'm trying to dog it down or trying to be. I'm just really want us to be protected on a large contract like this, and to make sure it includes what we want. And that I don't know if there's a strategic reason why it can't just wait a couple of weeks till the next board meeting. I don't know. I'm just concerned. If you guys would have, one of you board members would have a comment, you know what I mean? It'd be nice and helpful.
Have you looked over the contract? I assume you have, Bob.
I have, and so has Tim Edwards.
Okay. Pat, would it be advantageous for you to look it over?
It certainly couldn't hurt. I mean, I've said from the beginning I'm more than happy to review any contracts, and it's never a problem until it becomes a problem, as you know, kind of in the legal world, and it's a business decision versus a legal decision. But we can certainly take a look at it and see if there's any concerns.
Okay. Is there any specific reason why we get it done today, Bob, or is it going to
no,
us off by 2 weeks? Or
I think it would be fine to bring it back if that was the board's wishes.
I would move to table this until those that Patrick gets to look it over.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and second. Anybody have further comments regarding it? Okay, no. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carries.
Thank you.
All right. Works. I don't know, we want to quick do the...
Sure. Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I have number 5 in your packet are actually 2 applications to conduct off-site gambling, both by the Mankato Area Hockey Association, the only difference being the dates of the activities. Both times gambling will be conducted Indian Island Winery, the first one on October 13th, and the second one, I believe it's November 10th.
Move to approve.
Second.
Been moved in second, both of them?
Yep.
Okay. It's been moved in second, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carries. More gambling, okay. We have any, we should recess, take 5?
Yep.
Okay, we'll resume our board meeting, and we have good folks from Micah. Well, maybe you all just want to say your names once you get up here. Sure. Keith, you could start.
Welcome, welcome.
And welcome.
Everybody.
I'll get started here. I'm Keith Carlson. I'm the exec with Micah. Steve Novak. I handle the transportation issues for Micah.
I'm Nancy Selesky, and I do Health and Human Services.
Reinhard, and I handle corrections and public safety issues.
All right, thank you for being here.
For us all to be here. We had a great drive down. Appreciate the nice weather.
Beautiful.
Good to see you.
Well, we had a lot to do with that weather stuff.
Enjoying a little bit more of the community.
We're glad we could help with that.
It looks like you're bringing the good, the bad, and the ugly with us today.
That's exactly right. I'm gonna start
I was
things
going to
off.
put that. I was going to put that on a phone. My phone. I thought maybe that would be too irreverent.
Right. I'm going to start out with sort of an overview of the financial implications of this session and sort of look out to the future as to what you can do. And as my presentation says, you know, this session certainly had some good aspects towards it, as well as some bad and some ugly. And I'll just tell you, the ugly is obviously the governor's line item veto of the appropriation for the legislature that currently is the subject of a lawsuit that was heard at the Supreme Court yesterday. In terms of the good, with the legislature's action and the passage of its tax bill, next year Blue Earth County can look forward to $277,000 of additional county program aid. It will also receive a small amount of reimbursement, about 25% of your cost for the cost of out-of-home placement for children under the jurisdiction of what's called the Indian Child Welfare Act. Riparian aid, since the county has elected to assume jurisdiction for the enforcement of the buffer law. This year we get about $125,000, and next year that will go up to $157,000, and that should be ongoing thereafter. Ryan will cover it a little bit more, but with both the actions of the Community Corrections Act formula and additional funding for the current fiscal year that you're already in, you're receiving about $113,000 more. Nice. Your commercial industrial property owners can look forward to some relief from the state tax. In that next year, the first $100,000 of value will no longer be subject to the state tax. That applies to all properties, but obviously it's a greater benefit for your smaller business property owners. And finally, there are no levy limits, no reverse referendums on any levy increases that the board may elect to do. So your fate, you know, kind of remains in your hands. In terms of the bad, despite representations to the contrary, at least from a county perspective, I don't think the transportation bill was anything to crow about. Steve will get into it a little bit more, but for counties, what we saw was a relatively small $23 million in fiscal 18 and about $25 million in fiscal 19. In Blue Earth County, then, that's $360,000 next year and about $389,000 in the following year. Will certainly help with a few miles of like overlay, but doesn't really, frankly, gain you that much. Bridge bonds, beyond the amounts that were dedicated to specific projects, There's about 42 million out there, and then the local road improvement, same thing. Beyond the specifically dedicated projects, there's about 26 million. And that grant, competitive grant program applications are open right now, closing in November.
So that's, excuse me, that's the 41 million for the bridge bonds, that's for the whole state.
That's for the whole state, again, after some specific
Yeah, the
projects
bigger
that were
ones, yeah.
specifically designated in the legislation.
And that 26 million is also the whole state.
That's the whole state.
Okay. I'm sorry to, I just wanted to get that down.
Yep. The local road wetland replacement program, Steve and I put a lot of effort into this because, as you might recall, at the beginning of this construction season, we were facing the possibility that the state wasn't going to meet its obligation to pay for the wetland mitigations for your improvements to existing roads. We did get $5 million of cash relatively early in the session, but then the legislature, in our opinion, failed to follow through on finally kind of recapitalizing the wetlands bank going into the future. The agency had requested 10, they got 5. So we're still going to be facing a shortage of available wetlands credits for the foreseeable future, and we're going to put a lot of effort into trying to get that obligation met in this coming session. Steve will again touch on this, but really the biggest gain from the transportation was $940 million of bonding that was authorized for the trunk highways over the next 4 years. Continuing with the bad, you obviously all know at this point that the state is now requiring you to ultimately pick up 18% of the tab for the Min Choices program, the program where individuals under threat of going to a nursing home go through assessments as to what alternative services could be presented to them to prevent that from happening. METS, the Minnesota Eligibility Technology System, Nancy will touch on it more, but we didn't get any additional money. Nancy will tell you it could have been worse, but certainly wasn't good. The really bad, from my perspective, are twofold. One, relatively short-term financial challenges for the state, and then a longer term. First one is that the state's revenues have not been meeting forecast for several months now, and we're about 170 million behind through July. That points to the likelihood most of that, frankly, all of that shortfall was in the individual income tax area. If those trends continue, the state's facing a $500 million deficit. And the question really is what's the legislature and the governor going to do? There is a $1.6 billion budget reserve. Will they be willing to tap into that? And we can discuss that more if you want. The other thing, again, is longer term. In order to balance the budget, particularly in the medical assistance area, the legislature dipped further into what's called the Health Care Access Fund, which historically has funded MinCare. They went in there to the tune of about $390 million and plan on going in there for another $309 million in the following biennium. That's going to have the effect of drawing down that fund to basically nothing by the time we get to the conclusion of the next biennium, 4 years from this past July. The problem with that is then there's no money to continue filling that going into the future, and that's compounded by the fact that the revenue source of that fund, called the provider tax, expires at the end of 2019. So the question is, where are they going to get that money to plug that hole in the future? Certainly the federal deliberations on the fate of funding of the Medicaid expansion that occurred under Obamacare compounds that problem. With that, again, the last page was discussion of the lawsuit regarding the legislature's funding and the governor's line item veto of that. I'll conclude unless there are questions and turn things over to Nancy.
Question. On that wetland replacement program, I know off and on it's been discussed quite a bit through AMC, and looking at that program, there's been a lot of ideas that have come forward where is it possible to do some sort of a wetland sharing, you know, throughout the state somehow, you know, because and it makes sense to me because if you're up north where there's nothing but wetlands in some areas, to replace one up there does not hardly make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem to make sense. If you've got, you know, 50% of the land mass is wetland, and you're just going to put a road project, you need right of way, and you have to find a replacement for it. It just seems, so why couldn't it be shared somewhere else throughout the state? But that's never been approved, or, you know, like if we needed those credits somehow. Have you heard anything about that at all? Just wondering if that's still...
Well, there was a little bit of headway made on that over the last few years. First, you know, there's kind of two different pieces of geography. There's the less than 50% of pre-settlement wetlands area of the state, basically kind of a diagonal that cuts through the metropolitan area up in the Twin Cities. Then a line north of there called the 50 to 80%, and then the greater than 80%, which is the northern areas that you were talking about. It used to be really rigid that you couldn't basically replace wetlands that were disturbed in one of the adjacent areas. Now that latitude has been somewhat relaxed. So and quite frankly, it's been a particular benefit to one of our other members, Washington County, which is in the less than 50% area, but literally right across the road, and in the same watershed district and wetland bank services area. You know, there were credits available. That geography, like I said, has been relaxed, so you can do replacement across those three bands.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, you can do, so we could get something from up north if we needed to.
You can't go as far as
I didn't
that,
think so. Yeah, I
but
didn't think so.
within the same wetland bank service area,
Okay.
which there are 10, you can now cross those bands.
Okay.
There was other legislation that was authorized but has yet to come to called fruition, called the in lieu fee. And kind of combined with that, it said you'll look at what's the highest bang for the buck in terms of where's the true need for replacing wetlands, which probably is down in southern Minnesota, where much of it has been drained. Whether or not we actually get to there, and it's complicated by the federal requirements that kind of are superimposed on the state requirements.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it is incremental steps going towards that flexibility that you're talking
Oh,
about.
okay. Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, again, Nancy Selesky. In terms of human services, when you look at the forecasted growth, Keith illustrated that there were a number of reductions, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of reductions in the programs this year. Again, he also mentioned it's offset by the Healthcare Access Fund, but that balance at the end of 2021 is $4 million. So we went from a pretty healthy surplus to just $4 million left. So that's not going to be around. The 2% provider tax that we've been talking about sunsets at the end of 2019. And while the legislature has talked about extending that provider tax, it's not something that the current majority or the current legislature seems to be too interested in. However, I think the reality is going to hit here pretty soon that we have to come up with a funding source. In terms of what did pass, a number of micro priorities were on the agenda, and we were successful this year, largely led, I have to say, by Blue Earth County. Both Phil Clausen and Angie Youngerberg spent a lot of time at the legislature this year on a number of issues, and just want to mention them. They're just awesome to work with, and you are well represented at the legislature. Couple of things, pending federal approval, counties will be able to use case management through ITV, through technology services in certain cases. There are some limits put in that in the system. The person has to reside in a facility that is staffed 24/7. It needs to be appropriate for the client. The client has to agree, the provider has to agree, and of course the county has to agree that it's appropriate. It needs to be written into the client's case plan, and it's limited to no more than 50% of the required face-to-face visits that are currently required. So that did make it into the statutes, and again, it's pending federal approval. Again, pending federal approval, counties will have the ability to access medical assistance coverage for community-based service coordination at pre-booking. And this again came from Blue Earth County. This is when a person is picked up by law enforcement. They may be exhibiting a mental health issue. In the past, those folks frequently ended up in your jail. Under this scenario, there would be a social worker at the jail at pre-booking that, with the permission of law enforcement, if it's appropriate, try to get the person's services as opposed to putting them in your jail. Again, law enforcement has to sign off on it. If the person is not compliant with the plan that's been developed, then law enforcement would be free to pick them up again. Again, that was, it is pending federal approval, but that is on the books as well. And I just want to mention a couple of legislators, too, that were really helpful. You're well represented there as well. Senator Julie Rosen really is our champion on a number of issues. She was very helpful. And this post-arrest coordination was led by Tony Cornish. And it was interesting because Representative Cornish indicated that he'd never had a bill in the Human Services Committee before. So it was quite interesting working with him. He's, as you know, a law enforcement guy, and he did a great job. He was tenacious and got it done. So I just want to give him a plug as well. The legislature did put $2 million per biennium into mental health innovation grants, and this represents partial funding that counties or that the state collects from counties relative to our share at the Anoka Metropolitan Regional Treatment Center and community behavioral health hospitals. Those dollars currently go into the general fund, and under the legislation that passed, that $2 million per biennium will be redirected into the community, through grants to try and develop some options for mental health services in the community. Community services will be able to share limited data with education, Head Start, and health providers in an effort to achieve positive outcomes for our clients. At the same time, the client does have continued protection under HIPAA and the Minnesota Health Records Act. The legislature did fund a number of the governor's priorities. They put $50 million into early childhood. They put money into improved staffing at the Minnesota Security Hospital at St. Peter. Money for sexually exploited youth through Safe Harbor, substance use disorder reform, and mental health. Keith mentioned, unfortunately, that we did pick up a cost shift this year for the MnChoices assessment. This is intended, the intent of it is to try and streamline those assessments for those folks whose situation may not change and may not need to have the frequency or the depth of the assessments. But we're still working through that with Senator Abler, who was the architect of that bill. He's indicated that he's going to be convening some meetings during the interim in an effort to look at reforms in 2018 on this. In terms of public health, a local public health grant was maintained. There was no cut, no increase. The MA reimbursement rate is increased to a minimum of $140 for evidence-based nurse home visiting. A lot of discussion you've all seen and read about on opioids this year. They did put some policy language on the books. Tied to that is the statewide health improvement program, the SHIP program. They did fully fund that at $35 million for the biennium, but they did change the language that would require that at least 2 grants go toward opioid abuse prevention. The department is in the process of putting together some guidelines for counties, and we'll have something after the first of the year, I'm told. They put $12 million into home visiting for pregnant teens, $5 million into a public health response contingency fund, and this was largely in response to the recent measles outbreak as well as tuberculosis. Also, the final bonding bill includes $1 million for safe routes to schools. Just want to highlight a couple things that did not happen that were priorities for counties. Keith mentioned METS, the Minnesota Eligibility Technology System. At one point, there was no increase or cut at the end, but at one point, the funding was totally wiped out under the House proposal. That in the end did not happen, but we are, where we were, I think, is at $20 million, if I'm not mistaken, per biennium. At a recent DHS meeting, there were a couple of county commissioners, Commissioner Cascaden from Olmsted and Commissioner Brecky from Scott, who met with the commissioner and staff. And it was indicated at that meeting that there may be some federal funds that could be utilized for METS upgrades. We're going to hear a presentation at the MICA board meeting on September 13th, I think it is, our next meeting. We're going to have an update from the department on that issue. One of the disappointments, I think, one of the priorities for Senator Stenjum from Olmsted County was he wanted to put a significant amount of money into housing and services for folks with mental health issues. I think his proposal was about $80 million. That did not happen. He is the chair of that committee, so since next year is technically a bonding year, we're thinking that there'll be probably a smaller bonding bill, but that hopefully is in the mix next year. I think he'll want to see that happen. A lot of discussion about transitioning from the MNsure exchange to the federal exchange. That did not happen. And every year it seems that the folks that advocates come forward with wage increase proposals for folks that work in the home and community-based services area. It is something that did not happen this year. It is such a large expenditure that it just has not gotten over the hump, but I expect to see that coming again in the future. With that, I guess I would conclude by saying that the legislature seemed prone to work with us on innovative projects that don't cost a lot of money, obviously, and again, disappointed with this cost shift when we have such a healthy surplus in this last legislative session. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Nancy? But not right at the moment, but maybe we'll come up.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Next, Steve.
Steve Novak, Transportation. As you might recall, a year ago when we were here, we talked about the big accomplishment of the year was that the Republican House and the DFL Senate and the governor had publicly agreed on the size and scope of the transportation infrastructure problem in the state, and they pegged the number at $6 billion over 10 years. $600 million a year. So you might keep that figure in mind when I take you through the numbers, and you can decide how well they did this year. We at least have something to report on, unlike the previous couple of years. Of course, as further backdrop, when the session actually ended, there was no transportation bill and there was no bonding bill. Both of those bills passed in the 4-day special session, which gives you a little indicator of how difficult it was over there this year. In review, though, there was new money passed in the transportation bill, and it breaks out this way. $235 million for roads and bridges, $71 million for Metro Transit over a 2-year period of time. As Keith mentioned earlier, there was $940 million over 4 years in trunk highway bonds, of which $330 million is dedicated to the Corridors of Commerce program. There was a major change in another provision, which is the sales tax on leased motor vehicles, which had been in place since 2008. You may recall that the first $32 million stayed with the state. The remainder of the money was split 50-50 between 5 suburban counties for road and bridges and Greater Minnesota Transit. So as an example, the Mankato Transit System. The good news is when all was said and done on this, the $32 million has finally been captured and will be spent on transportation purposes. Time will tell whether it's good or bad news that we've included now 2 additional funds and changed the percentage structure of how the total amount of money will be distributed. 38% of the money now will be given to the 5 suburbs that previously got 50% of the total, 38% to Greater Minnesota Transit. 13% now goes to a new Minnesota State Transportation Fund, which is essentially local bridges, and that's that $25 million that was referenced earlier, and 11% of the money to the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund. The 38% for Greater Minnesota Transit represents essentially a slight increase in the next biennium over the money that was received before, and that's because we're now filtering through that $32 million that previously was left with the state. The big change, I think, is that you have to say, I think, in conclusion, that on the debate between the Republican House, who is pushing to spend general funds on transportation, versus the Democratic Senate and the governor, who are essentially arguing to expand revenues that traditionally were spent in this way constitutionally, like gas tax increases and license fee increases, that the House won that debate, which raged for about 3 years. And the big accomplishment in this year's bill was to begin the process of moving general funds essentially out of the sales tax on auto parts to transportation. What's interesting though, and what you need to take note of, because it's going to lead to some issues in 2018 to at least be discussed, is if the entire amount of money on the sales tax on auto parts had been transferred to transportation, there would have been a big number, 307 million. In other words, halfway to that goal of 600 million a year. Instead, for whatever combination of reasons, even though the bills were introduced that way, the provision that finally passed produced only 63 million in new transportation dollars out of existing general funds from the sales tax on auto parts. So there's quite a gap there between the 63 million that actually did transfer and the 307 million that could have transferred. The other issue that lingers and will be debated in the next session probably is whether or not the legislature will decide to try to make that provision constitutional to dedicate that money for transportation on into the future. A couple of other quick items that did pass that produced new money. There'll be a $75 fee now on electric cars and a mandated 15% reduction in MnDOT expenses. Shifting quickly to the bonding bill, what actually happened in the end is it related to transportation was $116 million for the local road improvement program and $49 million for local bridges, of which you can add on to that the $25 million that was previously referenced to create $74 million in the bridge category. Touching quickly on some other issues in the transportation area, in the end, after a lot of discussion, there was an increase in truck weights as it related to milk trucks and also construction materials, specifically aggregate materials. You may recall the mowing and haying issue that drew a lot of attention back about a year ago or 9 months ago. There was a bill that did pass that essentially put a one-year moratorium on that to be revisited in March of next year. There was a lot of committee time spent on railroad crossing safety, and in the end there was money spent on that, and that'll be spread throughout the state in a variety of ways. There was a division of opinion between the Senate and the House over turnbacks. In the beginning of the session, the bills that were being introduced in the Senate were scooping that money up, and we're going to redistribute it as part of a general pot. The House's position was to keep that turnback relationship with the state the way it's been, and that provision did prevail, which I think is a good thing. Keith referenced the local road improvement wetland replacement program, where we came up $5 million short on the bonding, so we're going to be revisiting that at the turn of the year, because we'll probably be having the same discussion we had last year, which is the spring construction season may be threatened as a result of that shortfall. In the end, after a lot of different bills were introduced and heard, MnDOT has been ordered to do studies on overall highway construction costs, min-pass lanes, and turnbacks. And then I just want to touch on the issue of the MILNARS, the computer structure within DPS that's supposed to be finally completed. As of January of next year, that will open up new possibilities on the wheelage tax for counties, where you'll be able to pick whatever rate you want between $0 and $20. And then the final thing I want to say is that it's a pleasure working with Ryan, your engineer. He's a regular participant in our monthly meetings, and we very much enjoy his input on a number of issues, and look forward to working with him in the future.
So Steve, you mentioned of the total of the auto parts, you said should be 307 million, and we're actually only getting 63 million.
Right.
I've talked to senators from across the state, and some of them still feel that it is a total amount instead of a portion. And in fact, the 63 million is just for 1 year, and then it's supposed to go up to 170 some million, isn't it, for
in the next biennium?
In the next biennium.
Right.
But it's still not the total amount.
Right.
If we get a constitutional amendment, would that be for the total amount?
Presumably, it would depend on how they worded it.
Okay.
That would be the idea then.
That'd be the idea. which of course comes out of the general fund.
Right.
And that's where the issue is, because, I mean, it would be a plus for transportation, but it would hurt the rest of our issues across the state. So, you know, damned if you do and damned if you don't. But thank you very much for that report. Really appreciate
Well,
it.
Commissioner, you spend probably more time up there than anybody that I've seen at the county board level, and I think that's appreciated. But so you know the difficult circumstance we're in here. I mean, for 80 years or 90 years, ever since we had cars and put gas in the tank, essentially we've paid for roads and bridges through gas tax, where there's a constitutional formula that does send money back to the counties and cities along with the state. And you know, that survived depressions, a couple of world wars and everything else, and that money's never been touched. But this new movement now politically did succeed in terms of suggesting that we should look to new money out of the general fund, which is not new money, but it's new transportation money. And the centerpiece of that was this issue of sales tax on auto parts, a big singular component that does have a rationale to it. So it's a bit of a mystery in terms of why in the end, when that was accomplished, they kind of put the brakes on and didn't allow the full amount of money to go through. And that's an issue that'll be discussed in the next year's session. And then on top of that, if they're going to do that, do they want to make it constitutional or not?
In fact, I was at the state fair yesterday and talked to a senator from St. Cloud. I can't think of his name. Anyway, he was Republican, and it was his total. I was explaining some of this to him, and he says, "Oh no," he says, "the total amount comes." I got his card, and I will be. But Steve, I'll get more information from you later. I appreciate the work you do. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You mentioned electric cars. Is that a one-time when you buy the car?
Yeah, one-time annual fee.
It's a one annual
It's
fee,
annual. Starters.
$75 a year. Okay.
Well, that's
interesting.
That's good.
Very interesting.
All right. Any other, Steve? Okay. And
all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. Again, Ryan Erdman, one of my hands covering corrections and public safety here for Mike. And I'll touch on a few things pretty quickly. The first one, funding. Keith already mentioned the CCA funding subsidy increase, and I am conscious of kind of the scope of where we are in the world. Keith talks about $25.5 million in CPA and hundreds of million in transportation and 11 million in cuts. And I'm here to talk and crow about $2.1 million in increased funding for CCA subsidy. And so like I said, I'm understanding of the scope, but I do want to mention that's a 3.6% increase. It's the largest increase we've seen in CCA funding in probably close to 2 decades, maybe a decade and a half. Since the early 2000s, we haven't seen that kind of funding increase. So that's a positive thing. And the other aspect that we're pretty pleased with is starting with the governor's request and all the way down is all the delivery systems were funded in percentage terms equally. We pursued efforts to try and force their hand unsuccessfully, but at least now for the short term we're seeing some returns on those efforts because they're voluntarily taking the position that we should be looking at all of these delivery systems and equitably funding them. Like I said, the governor started that conversation with his budget, and the legislature followed suit all the way through. So that's good news. Credit to Chair Cornish. He was really the champion at the end. They were scrimping for money, and he made sure that the pass-through funds for counties didn't go away. That was important to him, and I'm thankful to Josh Milo for being accessible to me, but also being accessible to Chair Cornish and really helping keep us at the forefront in his mind. So that's a real positive development. Of less good news on the funding side, one of the other county requests was for additional money for the disaster aid contingency account. This is an account that counties helped create just 3 years ago. Serves 2 purposes: allows for reimbursement to counties that don't meet the federal threshold, also allows for the state match to federal disaster aid without having to go to a special session. That fund is getting somewhat depleted. We requested $20 million in addition to go into that fund, and the legislature didn't come back with any. If you'd heard me present this 2 months ago, I would have given you a slightly different presentation. What they did is they put in some language that said, if there is a fund balance at the end of the fiscal year 2017, the one that ended back on June 30th, of $10 million or more, then they will transfer $10 million of that fund balance to the disaster aid account. Everybody was optimistic that that was going to happen. The way that the budget was coming together, the way the numbers were looking. Obviously, as Keith reported, we've now seen several months of tax collections that are well below projection. We don't have the final year-end stuff. If spending is below projections, it could be that there's not a deficit there. But I think the possibility of a fund balance to allow that money to come into the disaster aid account is not as optimistic as perhaps everyone thought it was. I think they thought they'd found a way to not spend any money in their target and replenish that fund. And I'm skeptical, given what we've seen on the revenue side, that we're going to have a lot of success in doing that. On the policy side, closely related to that and actually exacerbating the need for that fund, again, a county-supported piece of legislation that added rural utility cooperatives to the eligibility. That is consistent with federal law and makes them eligible for those disaster aid funds. So if we do have a major disaster, fortunately so far, knock on wood, we've been relatively disaster-free here in Minnesota. So perhaps if that continues for the rest of summer, maybe we'll be all right. But that could continue to be an issue. And also on the policy side, we pursued some legislation that clarified who is responsible for the liability for injuries or death while working on an STS crew. A careful reading of the existing statute determined that we kind of thought that everybody was covered by the state. The state had that responsibility for liability. There's a category of offenders that were actually not covered by state. In talking with Josh, I gather that's not really how you use STS here, so it maybe wasn't much of an issue. But on an ongoing basis, we did solve that. They did make the tweak that we asked for, and so all liability for injury will fall to the state, even if they're there working off administrative fees and other things rather than just under a court order. So that's another positive we saw on the policy side. We also some language that the sheriffs and DOC worked on jointly in kind of a continuous improvement process to streamline the process for the conveyance fee when sheriffs deliver folks to prison after sentencing. Not a big deal, but one I like to highlight just because we shows our criminal justice partners here at the county level and at the state level working together jointly for some positive outcomes. So it's just a nice highlight of some things going fairly well in that relationship lately. And the last thing I think I'll mention is we do finally have a Real ID bill that was passed and signed, and we can be implementing Real ID. And again, this over the last month, my presentation on this topic has changed a little bit slightly as well. The long and the short of it is by October of 2018, DPS will start issuing Real ID compliant driver's licenses. The state waiver has already been applied for from the feds. It's assumed we're going to get it. If that does come through, you won't actually need a Real ID driver's license till about mid-year 2020. So that will allow about half of all license holders to just get their Real ID on their normal renewal cycle. They put in a process in place for folks like me. My driver's license expires later this year, so I won't get a Real ID license, but my expiration date will be beyond 2020. A process for folks with a reduced rate to get a Real ID compliant license early. So that hopefully works well. However, part of the delay that DPS asked for was to get MNLARS up and running, and as you are all well aware through the media, and I'm guessing your deputy registrars have reported that MNLARS has been rolled out a month ago and is a real big mess. So it sounds like it's improved. The reports I'm hearing are, for the most part, it's improving as time goes on. But one of the things that the way that relates back to Real ID is there was no fee increase for the Real ID licenses. And it was unclear, and a reasonable argument could be made that there wouldn't be a lot more work, a lot more staff time into issuing a Real ID license than there's a traditional license. And if that's the case, great, then we don't need an additional fee increase. However, given the impacts that we've already seen of the MNLARS rollout, it makes me pretty cautious about what adding a layer of Real ID and this new type of license with additional data verification, layering that on top of the issues we're already seeing with MNLARS, like I said, gives me a little pause. And so we're going to have to watch that pretty closely and see what the workload impact is, if they've even gotten MNLARS sorted out by next fall when it's time to start issuing these, and how that's going to impact county budgets for the counties that operate deputy registrar offices, and whether there's going to be a need to be seeking some additional fees for those. So, it's good. Pretty big issue. They talked about it a lot. You know, we saw that they finally pushed it through by moving that controversial language related to driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. They moved that into the public safety bill. That is actually one of the 5 things on the governor's list of things he wants to revisit by forcing the special session that the Supreme Court may not give him. But if he wins at the Supreme Court and they're forced into a special session to refund the legislator, one of the things he wants to revisit is that driver's license language. But like I said, they moved that into the public safety bill, clearing the way for the Real ID passage. So those are really the highlights. That was a pretty quick report in the interest of time, and so I'm happy to take questions if there's things I glossed over or didn't mention at all. I'd be happy to talk more about that.
Okay. Anybody have any?
Just relating to some of the things you were saying, you know, thinking about how things were financed is taking care of human beings. Looking at corrections, looking at the Security Hospital in St. Peter, you know, there was a lot of good, I mean, there were some good things that happened, because I know that over the years, local corrections hasn't been funded very well as far as increases. I mean, it would be a celebration if they got like 0.6%, you know, not even a 1% increase. It'd be like, oh, you know, they got something. And so getting over 3% funding is maybe starting to catch up to where they needed some help. But then I was thinking about some things too, because it relates close to home for me, but nursing homes and direct care staff in the state of Minnesota still are way underpaid. And I don't know, I just don't understand what goes on with our legislators. It just doesn't seem to get communicated in a way that they want to believe it or not. You know, what do we value and how do we value? And I know that a lot of media noise from Security Hospital, and I would say some of it's mismanagement over there. The dollars will help, but it'll continue in the same trend unless there's some policy changes within the organization. That they get a lot of funding off and on. Believe it or not, the workers there get paid almost twice what nursing home direct care staff get paid. And they have no license to work, no certifications, get hired right off the street. Nursing home care staff and in-home care staff have to have a certificate from the state of Minnesota, are required to take specific training. And I just don't understand, you know, why we can't somehow raise up these people who are caring for some of our most vulnerable human beings and those that we say we care for and that we value.
Sure. And most of that's going to fall into Nancy's area. The one comment I'd offer is, as I view it kind of from a little bit outside the human services world, so I don't know the issue as well, but I think a lot of what we have, we just see huge capacity issues in every area of the system. I mean, particularly if you're talking about the Security Hospital and talking about mental health folks and the cost shares that Nancy and Keith and Irby talk about, and it's all about capacity and it's a lack of resources, and that falls down to how you compensate these folks. If then the demand for workers, there's a short supply, and if you compensate them better, but that money's got to come from somewhere. So, when I talk specifics of nursing home funding and staffing for home care, I'm going to entirely defer to Nancy on that. But I agree with your observation.
How we take care of human beings is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
How we take care of human beings, whether they're in jail, maximum security mental hospital. I mean, for some reason we believe that those staff should be paid, basically about $20 an hour, and nursing home staff, basically it's 10, 11, maybe 12 if you're doing okay, and you can't live on that with no benefits other than sick and vacation time, and full benefits at these other facilities.
So it's a complex issue. Yeah, the legislative debate on that's been happening in Nancy's world. So.
I was just going to mention when the folks advocates come forward with bills to increase wages, they're just talking normally about a 5% increase. So that I think the fiscal on that this last time was $150 million.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a huge number. And just what does 5% do? It's that.
Oh, I know.
It's one time. So.
Just for our county, we give let's say a 2 or 2.5% increase. It's over $500,000 just for our county, which isn't as large as many other counties. For salaries.
Seems to just be getting worse. I mean, people are increasingly going into are needing that type of care. And
Yeah. Well, I can tell you right now, there's probably about a half a dozen that are about ready to close their doors in southern Minnesota. Because they just can't do it. It's just there's just not enough funding to keep them going. And it's a real struggle. So, nursing home.
So, there's a lot of areas where money is part of it, but I think even just the worker shortage or people wanting to do certain types of jobs, I don't know. But anyway, that's a broader.
What's a big thing? I mean, I know it's a big celebration when corrections get some funds to help with things in the security hospital, that sort of thing, but they're still getting paid almost double, what direct care staff get for in-home care of people who need help. We've got an apartment building down here in Mankato that has 40 apartments in it of people who are very handicapped and have an extra. Somebody want to move around? I didn't mean to hold such a captive audience. No. But and I mean, it's in my neighborhood, the Durham apartments, and there's 40 apartments in there and 40 people that live inside of them, and it's a struggle to attract people and professionalize taking care of other human beings who need very detail-oriented cares. It might take somebody 4 to 5 hours in the morning to prepare them for the day because of the routines physically they have to go through to get dressed and to be ready. And so and they get paid, $9 or $10 an hour to do that. You might not attract the exact kind of person that likes to do that kind of thing. So, yeah. Anyway, I won't take any more time on that.
Commissioners, that sort of completes that presentation. I do want to thank Blue Earth County for its continued membership and particularly recognize Commissioner Brunder and Commissioner People for representing you on our board. They religiously attend our board meetings and certainly do a good job of representing the concerns of Blue Earth County. I also want to recognize Bob and your staff. I mean, we've mentioned them throughout our presentation. They've been invaluable in identifying issues and assisting us in advancing them at the legislature. So I do want to thank you and your staff for that. With that, be happy to hear any final comments or final questions.
We would also mention that we appreciate Micah. We drive an hour and a half up to that meeting, and Mark and I have a good time coming to that meeting. We always get a lot of good information out of it, and it is always exciting for us to hear about all the stuff that our staff is doing. In particular, Mark and I are doing, but it is exciting to hear about all our staff. And as far as I can tell, I think y'all got yourself a lunch today because you mentioned somebody specifically should buy you lunch. But no, I appreciate all you guys. Keith, you do a great job up there, and your staff. It's a wonderful time coming up there and meeting, regardless of all the construction.
Finally, that'll be done, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, we do appreciate you coming in, and yes, as Kip said, I think we find Micah is quite invaluable. I mean, we get a lot out of it, and appreciate it.
And the information that you share throughout the state and with our legislators.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
I would move to recess to Charlie's if we're done with all of our business.
I think we're all done, so we gotta move.
Second.
Second?
Oh. Is it all right? I think everybody doesn't have to be business, but I'm just kind of curious. The Commissioner of Health has asked me to be on some short-term task force this fall, like 3 meetings maybe or something, on looking at some public health issues. And I forgot to ask the board about it. I was going to ask.
Isn't that?
Give me an answer. It's not part of SHAC. It's separate. It's a separate deal, but it's similar, very similar.
Bother me.
It's kind of a general consensus feel.
It's always a plus to have somebody from Blue Earth County representing us. So as far as I'm concerned, I think it's right. But I'm only 1 of 5.
Thank you.
We're in the middle of that, but anyway, we'll move to adjourn.